Jasmine Washington's fingers tightened around her boarding pass as the white pilot loomed over her, his face twisted with disdain. "First class isn't for everyone, miss. There must be a mistake." Behind him, passengers stared. Jasmine smiled coolly. "You're right about one thing, Captain Reynolds. There is definitely a mistake." Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe. If you're ready to see justice take flight in this unbelievable true story of discrimination in the betting skies. Long before Jasmine Washington found herself confronted by Captain Reynolds, she had been climbing the steep ladder of success in an industry where people who looked like her were rarely seen in positions of power. At 32 years old, Jasmine had already accumulated achievements that most executives wouldn't reach in their entire careers. Growing up in Atlanta, she watched her single mother, Denise Washington, work grueling hours cleaning airplanes for Delta Airlines. Every evening, Denise would return home with aching feet and chemical-burned hands, but never without a smile for her daughter. "One day, baby girl, you're going to fly on those planes instead of clean them," Denise would tell Jasmine as they sat at their small kitchen table poring over homework by lamplight. Jasmine took those words to heart. Through high school, she maintained perfect grades while working part-time at a local grocery store. When acceptance letters arrived from several prestigious universities, she chose Howard University, drawn to its legacy of empowering Black excellence. College wasn't easy. Jasmine juggled 3 jobs while maintaining her scholarship requirements. She waited tables on weekends, worked at the university library on weeknights, and spent summer breaks interning at various airlines. Sleep became a luxury as she pursued her MBA with a focus on aviation management. "You're killing yourself," her roommate Tasha would say, watching Jasmine stumble in at midnight, only to be up studying again at 4 in the morning. "I'm building a future," Jasmine would respond, never looking up from her textbooks. Her entry into the aviation world began as a flight attendant for Atlantic Airways, where she quickly noticed how the executive meetings she glimpsed through half-open doors featured rooms full of white men making decisions for a diverse workforce. Instead of accepting this as the status quo, Jasmine used her position to learn everything about the airline industry from the ground up. Within 3 years, she'd moved from cabin service to operations management, impressing executives with her keen understanding of efficiency improvements. By 28, she was director of customer experience, implementing changes that increased Atlantic satisfaction ratings by 27%. It was during this time that Jasmine met Elaine Thompson, one of the few Black female executives in the industry who headed regional operations at a competing airline. "This industry wasn't built for us," Elaine told Jasmine during their first lunch meeting. "But that's exactly why we need to rebuild it." Elaine became more than a mentor. She became Jasmine's strategic ally. When Jasmine shared her dream of starting her own aviation company, focused on diversity and inclusion, Elaine introduced her to potential investors and industry contacts. At 30, Jasmine took the biggest risk of her life. She left her secure 6-figure position and founded Skyline Aviation, starting with 2 leased aircraft and a business model that emphasized diverse hiring practices and inclusive customer service. "You're either brave or crazy," her former boss said when she handed in her resignation. "Maybe a little of both," Jasmine had replied with a confident smile. Skyline's first year was brutal. Jasmine went without salary, sleeping on a pull-out couch in her tiny office to save on rent. Established airlines tried to undercut her routes, and investors constantly questioned whether a young Black woman could successfully run an airline. But Jasmine had spent her life proving people wrong. By the end of the second year, Skyline Aviation was not just surviving but thriving, with 6 aircraft and routes connecting 15 cities. Aviation journals began featuring Jasmine's innovative approach, particularly her emphasis on creating an airline culture where passengers and employees of all backgrounds felt valued. When Legacy Airlines, a struggling regional carrier with a fleet of 24 planes, came up for sale, Jasmine saw an opportunity. The airline had decent routes, but terrible customer service ratings and a corporate culture stuck in the 1,980 seconds. With backing from a progressive investment group impressed by Skyline's performance, Jasmine acquired Legacy in a move that shocked the industry. The acquisition was finalized on paper, but Jasmine had kept it quiet from most Legacy employees. Instead of immediately announcing new ownership and making sweeping changes, she decided to experience the airline as a customer first. She wanted to understand exactly what needed to change. "I need to see it through the passengers' eyes," she explained to her executive team, "and I need to see how they treat people who look like me when they don't know who I am." Which is how Jasmine Washington, owner of Legacy Airlines, ended up booking a first-class ticket on Flight 2207 from Atlanta to Chicago under her own name, deciding to travel incognito to assess the customer service culture before announcing the completion of the acquisition. What she didn't anticipate was coming face-to-face with the very discrimination she had built her career fighting against, and from the captain of her own airplane, no less. The first-class cabin of Legacy Airlines, Flight 2207, gleamed with luxury that seemed trapped in time. Wood-paneled sidewalls complemented cream leather seats, giving the space an old-money feel that matched its predominantly white occupants. As Jasmine made her way down the jet bridge, her designer pantsuit and leather portfolio case marked her as a business traveler indistinguishable from any other executive except for the color of her skin. Jasmine found her seat 2A, a window position with extra legroom in the first row. She stowed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled in, pulling out her tablet to review some documents before takeoff. Around her, businessmen in expensive suits and older couples in casual luxury wear filled the other first-class seats, many glancing at her with barely disguised surprise. Flight attendant Rebecca Parker, a blonde woman in her 40s with a practiced smile, moved through the cabin, offering pre-flight beverages. When she reached Jasmine, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Rebecca asked, her voice pleasant, but her eyes scanning Jasmine's boarding pass with unusual scrutiny. "Yes, 2A," Jasmine replied calmly, having experienced this particular microaggression countless times before. "It's just that we had a few seat changes today," Rebecca persisted. "Let me double-check for you." Jasmine noticed that no other passengers had received this extra verification. She maintained her professional demeanor as Rebecca finally reluctantly offered her a choice of water or orange juice. "Water, please," Jasmine said, returning to her tablet. A young black flight attendant named Darius Johnson passed through the cabin, making eye contact with Jasmine briefly. His expression conveyed an unspoken understanding. He'd seen this scenario play out before. He gave her a subtle nod before continuing with his preparations. 10 minutes before scheduled departure, Captain Samuel Reynolds entered the cabin for his pre-flight check. A tall man in his 50s with silver hair and a commanding presence, Reynolds moved through the first-class section, making small talk with select passengers. His practiced charm evaporated when he noticed Jasmine. He stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly as they flicked from her face to her seat number and back again. Without greeting her as he had the other passengers, he made a beeline for Rebecca, who was arranging glasses in the galley. They spoke in hushed tones, both glancing in Jasmine's direction. Moments later, Reynolds approached her seat, standing over her with an air of authority. "Excuse me, miss, may I see your boarding pass?" he asked, loud enough that nearby passengers turned to watch. Jasmine calmly retrieved her boarding pass from her portfolio case and handed it to him. "Is there a problem, Captain?" Reynolds examined the pass, turning it over as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. First class to Chicago, he muttered, sounding almost disappointed. That's correct, Jasmine replied. And your ID, please, he continued, extending his hand. Jasmine was keenly aware of the eyes on them now. Thomas Whitfield, a middle-aged businessman in 3C, was watching the interaction with undisguised interest, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. She produced her driver's license. Reynolds scrutinized it longer than necessary before reluctantly returning both items to her. First time in first class, he asked his tone, suggesting she had somehow stumbled into a country club without membership. No, Captain Reynolds, Jasmine replied, maintaining eye contact. I fly first class quite regularly. Reynolds seemed taken aback that she knew his name, though it was clearly displayed on his uniform. Well, just making sure everything is in order, he said. We've had some security concerns recently. As he moved away, Jasmine heard him mutter to Rebecca, keep an eye on 2A. The interaction wasn't unusual for Jasmine. Throughout her career, she'd been questioned, second-guessed, and underestimated. Each time, she'd responded with composure and competence, letting her achievements speak for themselves. But today felt different. This was an airline she now owned, and the discrimination was happening before the plane had even left the ground. Jasmine discreetly activated the recording function on her phone, placing it on her lap beneath her tablet. Something told her she might need documentation of what was unfolding. Darius approached with a basket of hot towels, offering her one with a look of apology in his eyes. As she accepted it, he whispered, "I'm sorry about that, ma'am." Before she could respond, Rebecca was back at her seat. "I'm afraid there might be an issue with your reservation," she said loudly. "Our system is showing some inconsistencies." "What sort of inconsistencies?" Jasmine asked, her voice level. "My reservation was confirmed yesterday, and I've already been issued a boarding pass for this seat." Several passengers were now openly watching the exchange. Thomas Whitfield had even put down his newspaper to observe. "Sometimes our system makes mistakes," Rebecca insisted. "Perhaps you were accidentally upgraded. Let me check if there's a seat available in economy that would be more appropriate." The implication hung in the air. More appropriate for whom? "I paid for first class," Jasmine stated firmly. "I have a confirmed reservation for this seat. Unless the flight is being canceled, I'll be staying right here." Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'll need to discuss this with the captain." "Excuse me." As Rebecca retreated to the cockpit, Jasmine noticed Thomas Whitfield lean across the aisle toward another passenger. "Some people just don't know their place anymore," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Darius, who was collecting trash nearby, visibly tensed, but remained silent. The power dynamics were clear. Speaking up could cost him his job. Minutes passed and the departure time came and went. Passengers began to shift uncomfortably, checking their watches. Finally, Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit and made a beeline for Jasmine's seat this time, with Rebecca close behind. "Miss Washington," he began, his tone now formal and cold. "There seems to be a security flag associated with your reservation. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and come with us." A security flag, Jasmine repeated loud enough for others to hear. "What kind of security flag?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss that on the aircraft," Reynolds replied. "If you'll just come with us, we can sort this out at the gate and perhaps get you on a later flight." It was a tactic Jasmine had seen before, creating a false security concern to justify discrimination. But knowing she needed to document the full extent of the situation, she decided to comply while continuing to record. "I'd like to understand the specific nature of this security concern," she insisted, gathering her belongings slowly. "Ma'am, I'm the captain of this aircraft, and I need you to comply immediately," Reynolds said, his patience visibly thinning. Thomas Whitfield chose this moment to interject. "Captain, if she's a security risk, shouldn't you call security? We have schedules to keep." "Security has been called," Rebecca replied with satisfaction. As if on cue, a security officer appeared at the door of the aircraft. Officer Marcus Green, An African-American man in his 30s looked uncomfortable as he surveyed the situation. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. "This passenger needs to be escorted off for additional screening," Reynolds stated authoritatively. "There's a security flag on her reservation." Marcus looked at Jasmine, then back at Reynolds. "I'll need to see the alert documentation." As Reynolds fumbled to produce evidence of the alleged security concern, Jasmine stood dignity intact despite the humiliation of the moment. "I'll cooperate fully," she said, clearly addressing not just Marcus but the entire cabin. "But I want it noted that I have a valid first-class ticket, have cleared all security, and am being removed without any explanation of wrongdoing." A young Asian American woman in row 4, Alexandra Chen, had quietly begun recording the scene on her phone, her expression one of outrage on Jasmine's behalf. As Jasmine was escorted toward the exit, she held her head high, remembering a similar incident years ago when she'd been bumped from a flight to make room for a white passenger, despite having a confirmed reservation. Back then, she'd had no recourse but to accept the injustice. She had promised herself it would never happen again. Now, as she walked the gauntlet of staring passengers, that old promise echoed in her mind. The difference was that today, unbeknownst to Captain Reynolds or anyone else on the aircraft, she had the power to ensure accountability. The air in the first-class cabin seemed to thicken as Jasmine stood gathering her belongings under the watchful eyes of Captain Reynolds and flight attendant Rebecca Parker. Every movement she made was scrutinized, every item she collected, observed as if she might suddenly produce something dangerous. "Let's not make a scene," Reynolds said in a low voice that nonetheless carried to nearby passengers. "I think you would be more comfortable in economy, or perhaps on another flight altogether." The suggestion that she belonged in economy rather than first class, that this luxury space wasn't for people like her, hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Thomas Whitfield, the businessman who had been watching the situation unfold with thinly veiled satisfaction, chose this moment to insert himself further into the confrontation. "Captain, I fly this route twice monthly," he announced loudly. "I've never seen such unprofessional behavior from a passenger. You're absolutely right to address this situation." His emphasis on the word situation made it clear what he really meant. Jasmine herself was the problem, not any legitimate security concern. Rebecca nodded in agreement. "I've already called security," she said, as if Jasmine were actively threatening the safety of the aircraft rather than simply sitting in her assigned seat. Jasmine kept her expression neutral, though inside she felt a familiar fire building. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel less than, out of place, or unwelcome because of the color of their skin. The cabin door reopened, and Security Officer Marcus Green stepped aboard. His dark uniform and official badge immediately changed the atmosphere in the cabin. Passengers who had been openly staring now quickly averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the safety cards in their seatback pockets. "What seems to be the issue?" Marcus asked, his gaze moving between Reynolds and Jasmine. "This passenger needs to be removed for additional screening," Reynolds stated with authority. "There's a security flag on her reservation." Marcus turned to Jasmine. "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass and ID?" Jasmine handed over her documents for what felt like the 100th time. "Officer Green," she said, reading his name badge. "I've already cleared TSA security, had my boarding pass scanned at the gate, and was seated in my assigned seat when the captain approached me. I've shown my ID multiple times." Marcus examined her documents, his brow furrowing slightly. "Everything appears to be in order," he said. "Captain, what specific security concern has been flagged?" Reynolds hesitated, clearly not expecting to be questioned by security. The system flagged her," he said vaguely. "We need to verify her identity and reservation before we can proceed." "Her identity matches her ID and boarding pass," Marcus pointed out. "The gate agent would have flagged any system alerts during boarding." "Look," Reynolds said, lowering his voice and leading Marcus slightly away from Jasmine, though she could still hear him clearly. "This is an issue of passenger comfort. Several passengers have expressed concerns." Marcus glanced around the cabin. "Which passengers?" Thomas Whitfield raised his hand. "I, for one, am concerned about the delay this is causing. If there's a question about appropriate seating, it should be resolved quickly." The implication was clear. Whitfield believed Jasmine's presence in first class was inappropriate. Marcus looked uncomfortable, caught between protocol and the clear injustice unfolding before him. "Ma'am," he finally said to Jasmine, "would you mind stepping off the aircraft briefly so we can resolve this situation? I assure you we'll get this straightened out." Jasmine knew she had a choice. She could refuse to demand her rights and potentially escalate the situation into an even more public spectacle. Or she could strategically comply, documenting everything and address the situation from a position of greater power off the aircraft. "I'll comply with your request, Officer Green," she said clearly, knowing her phone was still recording in her pocket. "But I want it noted that I'm being removed from my rightfully purchased seat without any valid explanation." As she moved toward the exit, whispers followed her. Hushed voices, some sympathetic, others judgmental, created a soundtrack of humiliation. "Always making everything about race," one voice muttered. "Poor thing, this is terrible," said another. Darius Johnson, the young black flight attendant, caught her eye as she passed. His expression conveyed silent apology and shared understanding he'd seen this before, perhaps experienced it himself, but was powerless to intervene without risking his livelihood. The walk down the aisle felt interminable. Every step was an exercise in dignity preservation. Jasmine held her head high, her back straight, refusing to show the hurt and rage building inside her. She'd learned long ago that showing emotion would only reinforce stereotypes about angry black women, so she moved with deliberate calm, her face a mask of composure even as her heart pounded with indignation. As she neared the exit, she noticed Alexandra Chen, a young woman of Asian descent, openly recording the scene on her phone. Their eyes met briefly, and Alexandra gave her a small nod of solidarity. Someone, at least, was capturing independent evidence of what was transpiring. Stepping onto the jet bridge, Jasmine thought back to another incident years ago. She had been a recent college graduate on her first business trip, bumped from her confirmed flight to make room for a late-arriving white executive. She had accepted it then, swallowing the humiliation, believing she had no recourse. She had promised herself that day that she would never again be powerless in such a situation. The irony wasn't lost on her. Today she had more power than anyone on that aircraft realized. Yet here she was, once again, walking the gauntlet of stares and whispers, experiencing the same public humiliation. The difference was that today she wasn't walking away defeated. Today she was gathering ammunition. The jet bridge felt unnaturally silent compared to the hushed whispers of the aircraft cabin. Captain Samuel Reynolds stood with his shoulders squared, hands clasped behind his back in a stance that screamed authority. Beside him, flight attendant Rebecca Parker maintained her practiced smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Security officer Marcus Green positioned himself slightly apart from the airline staff, his discomfort with the situation evident in his shifting stance. Jasmine stood facing them, her designer briefcase clutched in one hand, dignity wrapped around her like armor. "Now that we're off the aircraft," she said evenly, "I'd like a clear explanation of why I was removed from my seat." Reynolds cleared his throat. "As I mentioned, there was a security flag." "What kind of security flag specifically?" Jasmine interrupted. "I've flown hundreds of times without issue. I cleared TSA and boarding without any alerts. My ticket and ID match. So please explain exactly what security concern I supposedly present." Reynolds and Rebecca exchanged glances before he continued. Miss Washington Airlines reserve the right to reseat passengers for various reasons. This isn't about you personally. It's about ensuring passenger comfort and adhering to airline policy. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. He was speaking to her as if explaining complex concepts to a child. Passenger comfort, Jasmine repeated. Whose comfort exactly? The only discomfort I observed was caused by you and your flight attendant questioning my presence in first class. Rebecca stepped forward, her smile now completely gone. Miss Washington, your attitude is precisely the issue. First class has certain standards of behavior. What behavior? Jasmine challenged. Sitting quietly in my assigned seat, responding professionally when repeatedly questioned about my right to be there. Please explain which standard I failed to meet. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Captain Reynolds, I don't see any security flags in the system for Miss Washington. What specific concern prompted this removal? Before Reynolds could answer, Jasmine decided it was time to show a fraction of her hand. I believe I can answer that, Officer Green. The concern isn't about security at all. I'm an aviation executive with over a decade of industry experience. What we're experiencing right now is textbook discrimination. A black woman in first class being assumed out of place. Reynolds' expression changed, confidence faltering slightly. An aviation executive? With which airline? That's not relevant to whether I should be removed from a seat I legally purchased, Jasmine replied coolly. But since you ask, I've held senior positions with Atlantic Airways and now run my own aviation company. Marcus's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Washington. Jasmine Washington, of Skyline Aviation. Reynolds and Rebecca exchanged another glance, this one tinged with uncertainty. Anyone can claim to be an executive, Reynolds said dismissively. The fact remains that your reservation has been flagged, and as captain, I have final authority over who flies on my aircraft. Your aircraft? Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Before the conversation could continue, a harried-looking man in a Legacy Airlines management uniform hurried down the jet bridge toward them. Captain Reynolds, what's going on? We have passengers complaining about the delay, said Martin Coleman, the gate supervisor, before noticing Jasmine. Is there an issue here? This passenger was removed for additional screening, Reynolds explained. There were security concerns. Martin looked confused. What security concerns? Nothing came up when she boarded. She claims to be some kind of airline executive, Rebecca interjected. But regardless, Captain Reynolds has made his decision. Jasmine reached into her briefcase and pulled out her phone. While we sort this out, I'd like to contact my office. I also find it interesting that despite multiple requests, no one has actually shown me this alleged security flag. As she began to dial, she noticed Martin's expression change as he finally processed her name on the ID that Marcus was still holding. Miss Washington, Jasmine Washington Martin, asked, his voice suddenly higher. Yes, she confirmed. Could you excuse us for just a moment? Martin said, pulling Reynolds and Rebecca aside for a hurried, whispered conversation. While they huddled, Jasmine managed to connect with her assistant. Tanya, I need you to pull up anything you can find on Legacy Airlines discrimination complaints for the past 5 years. Also check if Captain Samuel Reynolds or Flight Attendant Rebecca Parker have any previous incidents noted. Yes, I'm experiencing an issue right now. Thank you. Have you ever been judged based on your appearance rather than your abilities? Comment number 1 if you've experienced discrimination in a professional setting, or number 2 if you've witnessed someone else being discriminated against. Like this video if you believe accountability is important in these situations, and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. Now, what do you think will happen next? Will Jasmine reveal her true position, or will she continue gathering evidence of the airline's discriminatory practices? Let's find out as our story continues. As Jasmine ended her call, she decided to try accessing Legacy systems directly. After all, she now had the authorization codes as the company's new owner. Opening her tablet, she connected to the airport Wi-Fi and logged into the airline's secure portal. What she found confirmed her suspicions. There was no security flag on her reservation, but there was a note added manually after boarding began. Passenger reassignment recommended. CR priority. CR almost certainly stood for Captain's Request. More disturbing, when she searched the system for similar notations, she found dozens of instances over the past year disproportionately affecting passengers with names suggesting they were people of color. Miss Washington Martin said, returning from the huddled conversation with Reynolds and Rebecca, "There seems to be some confusion. Perhaps we could continue this discussion in the terminal." "I'm quite comfortable here," Jasmine replied. "I've just accessed Legacy's reservation system, and interestingly, there is no security flag on my reservation." There is, however, a note about passenger reassignment added after I boarded. Martin blanched. "You accessed our system. How did you?" "As I mentioned," Jasmine said, "I'm an aviation executive. More specifically, as of this week, I'm the new owner of Legacy Airlines." The jet bridge fell completely silent. The administrative office of Gate C-24 was a stark contrast to the luxury of first-class utilitarian furniture, fluorescent lighting, and the faint smell of stale coffee. Jasmine sat across from Victoria Harris, the airport operations manager, who had been hastily summoned when Martin Coleman realized the gravity of the situation. Victoria, a poised woman in her late 40s with salt and pepper hair, pulled into a tight bun, reviewed the documents Jasmine had pulled up on her tablet. "Miss Washington, I want to personally apologize for your experience today," Victoria said, her tone professional but genuinely concerned. "This is not representative of how we expect airlines operating from our airport to treat their passengers." "I appreciate that," Miss Harris Jasmine replied, "but I'm less concerned with apologies and more interested in addressing the systemic issues at play." Victoria nodded. "I understand. From an airport management perspective, we take discrimination very seriously. May I ask what your intentions are regarding this incident?" It was a carefully worded question. Victoria was trying to gauge whether Jasmine planned to file a formal complaint or pursue legal action against both the airline and potentially the airport itself. "My intentions are to transform Legacy Airlines from top to bottom," Jasmine stated. "This incident simply confirms how urgently that transformation is needed." While Victoria processed this response, Jasmine used the moment to continue her digital investigation. With her ownership access codes, she was diving deeper into Legacy's records than she had been able to before. The pattern she uncovered was disturbing. Over the past 3 years, there had been 27 formal complaints about discriminatory treatment filed against Legacy Airlines staff. 17 of those complaints named Captain Reynolds specifically. All of them had been handled internally, with most resulting in nothing more than a notation in personnel files. She pulled up Reynolds' personnel record, scrolling through years of service. His technical evaluations were impeccable. The man clearly knew how to fly an airplane. But there were multiple notes about passenger interaction concerns that had never resulted in disciplinary action. One incident from 14 months ago caught her attention. A black doctor had been removed from first class on a flight from Chicago to Atlanta after Reynolds claimed there was a medical emergency requiring the seat for another passenger. The doctor had filed a complaint, including testimony from other passengers that no such emergency existed, but the matter had been closed with a form letter and discount voucher. Rebecca Parker's file showed a similar pattern. Excellent technical evaluations for her service duties paired with multiple customer interaction incidents that disproportionately involved passengers of color. While Jasmine continued her research, her phone buzzed with messages from her executive team who were tracking the situation in real time. Social media picking up the incident read a text from her communications director. Passenger video starting to circulate with number flying while black. Recommend immediate statement. Attached was a link to Alexandra Chen's Twitter post, a 2-minute video clearly showing Jasmine being questioned and removed from the aircraft with the caption, "Watching racial profiling happen in real time on at Legacy Air. Black woman with correct ticket removed from first class because she didn't look like she belonged there. Disgusting. Number flying while black." The post was already gaining traction, with hundreds of retweets and comments pouring in, many sharing similar experiences with Legacy and other airlines. Victoria, who had been making calls of her own, set down her phone with a grave expression. "Miss Washington, I've spoken with our legal team and airport security. Officer Green confirms there was no legitimate security concern that warranted your removal. This appears to be a clear violation of airline regulations and possibly civil rights laws." Jasmine nodded, still focused on her screen. "I've identified 27 similar incidents at Legacy in the past 3 years alone. This isn't an isolated event, it's a pattern." "May I ask what you plan to do next?" Victoria inquired carefully. Looking up from her tablet, Jasmine made a decision. "I'm going back to the aircraft." Victoria's eyebrows shot up. "Are you sure? That's wise. We could rebook you on another flight, perhaps with a different airline." "I'm not just a passenger, Miss Harris. I'm the owner of Legacy Airlines, and I have a responsibility to every person on that plane and every employee of the company." Jasmine stood gathering her belongings. "Captain Reynolds and Miss Parker don't know that yet, and I intend to see exactly how far they're willing to go when they believe they're unaccountable." Victoria seemed uncertain. This could escalate the situation. It already escalated the moment they decided I didn't belong in first class because of the color of my skin. Jasmine's voice remained calm, but carried an unmistakable note of determination. "Now, I need to see this through. Not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been in my position without the power to fight back." Victoria considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll accompany you personally." As they prepared to leave the office, Jasmine received another message from her team. They had compiled a comprehensive report on discrimination complaints across Legacy's network, revealing that the issue extended far beyond Reynolds and Parker. There was a troubling culture throughout the company that had been allowed to fester under previous leadership. The report also contained something unexpected: flight manifest data, showing that when first-class sections weren't full, black passengers with confirmed reservations were over 40% more likely to be reassigned to economy than white passengers. The pattern was subtle enough to avoid obvious detection, but statistically significant when analyzed across thousands of flights. "This is exactly why I decided to experience the airline as a passenger before announcing the acquisition," Jasmine muttered, showing Victoria the data. "The corporate culture runs deeper than I imagined." Victoria reviewed the information with growing concern. This could become a major class action situation if it became public. "It already is public," Jasmine replied, showing her the growing social media response to Alexandra Chen's video. The question now is whether Legacy Airlines will be remembered as a company that perpetuated discrimination or one that took bold steps to eliminate it. As they walked back toward Gate C-24, Jasmine made 2 quick calls, one to her legal team instructing them to prepare for potential action, and another to Richard Bennett, Legacy's Vice President of Operations, who was one of the few executives aware of the ownership change. "Richard, meet me at Gate C-24 immediately. We have a situation that requires your presence." She paused, listening to his response. "No, don't announce anything yet. Just get here as quickly as possible." The gate area was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Passengers from Flight 2207 had begun to congregate near the desk, many expressing frustration about the continuing delay. News of the incident had spread, and several people were on their phones, likely sharing details on social media or messaging loved ones about the holdup. Martin Coleman was attempting to manage the situation, assuring passengers they would depart soon while simultaneously trying to reach Captain Reynolds, who remained on the aircraft with the door now closed. "Mr. Coleman," Jasmine called, approaching the gate desk. Please reopen the aircraft door. I'll be reboarding now." Martin looked panicked. "Miss Washington, I don't think Captain Reynolds will." "Captain Reynolds works for me now," Jasmine stated firmly. "Open the door." Victoria Harris stepped forward. "As airport operations manager, I'm instructing you to reopen that aircraft door immediately, Mr. Coleman. This has become an airport security matter." Faced with direct orders from airport management, Martin had no choice but to comply. As he keyed his radio to instruct the ground crew to reconnect the jet bridge, Jasmine prepared for what would come next. She wasn't just returning to her seat now. She was walking back to confront a system that had humiliated countless travelers who lacked her power and position. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would set the tone for everything that followed at Legacy Airlines. And she was determined to make it count. The sound of the aircraft door reopening sent a ripple of surprise through the first-class cabin. Passengers who had settled in for departure, relieved that the problem had been removed, now looked up in confusion. Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, his face darkening, when he saw Jasmine Washington walking confidently back on board, flanked by Victoria Harris and Marcus Green. "What is the meaning of this?" Reynolds demanded, blocking the aisle. "This aircraft is prepared for departure." "The aircraft isn't going anywhere," Captain Reynolds, Victoria stated firmly. "Not until this situation is properly addressed." Passengers shifted in their seats, phones discreetly raised to capture whatever drama was about to unfold. Thomas Whitfield, who had been so vocal in supporting Jasmine's removal, suddenly became intensely interested in the safety information card. "This is highly irregular," Reynolds protested. "I have final authority over this aircraft, and I've determined that—" "You've determined nothing legitimate." Jasmine interrupted, her voice clear and steady. "You removed me from this flight without cause, and now I'm returning to my rightfully purchased seat." Rebecca Parker appeared from the galley, her practiced smile completely gone. "Captain, should I call for additional security?" The emphasis on additional was a clear attempt to frame Jasmine, Victoria, and Marcus as security threats rather than officials addressing misconduct. "That won't be necessary, Miss Parker," Jasmine replied before Reynolds could answer. "In fact, I'd appreciate it if you'd gather the entire crew in the forward galley. What I have to say concerns all of you." "I don't take orders from passengers," Rebecca snapped. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Other passengers watched with wide eyes, some clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, while others seemed riveted by the unfolding drama. Alexandra Chen, still recording discreetly from her seat, caught Jasmine's eye and gave a small nod of encouragement. Marcus Victoria said quietly to the security officer, "Please ensure that no one interferes with Miss Washington returning to her seat." As Marcus moved to comply, a breathless man in a suit appeared at the aircraft door. Richard Bennett, Legacy's VP of Operations, had arrived as requested. His presence immediately changed the dynamic. "Captain Reynolds," Richard called out, his voice tinged with alarm. "Step aside and allow Miss Washington to her seat, now." Reynolds turned, confusion evident on his face. "Richard, what are you doing here? This is an operational matter that—" "This is much more than an operational matter," Richard cut in. "Please do as I say." Reynolds' authority visibly deflated at the arrival of a senior executive. He stepped aside reluctantly, allowing Jasmine to move past him toward her original seat in 2A, which had remained empty. As she settled in, Jasmine noted the reactions around her. Some passengers avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their silent complicity. Others stared, openly curious about this woman who had left in humiliation but returned with an entourage of officials. Thomas Whitfield, however, couldn't resist making one more comment. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Playing the race card always works, doesn't it?" Jasmine ignored him, instead addressing the crew who had gathered at the front of the cabin at Richard's instruction. "I want to thank those of you who are about to listen carefully," she began. "Before we proceed, I'd like to address something specific." She turned to Reynolds. "Captain, I'd like access to the flight deck communication logs for the past 30 minutes. Reynolds balked. That's completely out of protocol. Flight deck communications are. Richard Jasmine cut in, looking at the VP. Please ensure that Captain Reynolds complies. Richard nodded grimly. Sam, give her access. Now. Reynolds' face flushed red as he realized he was being overridden, but he reluctantly produced his tablet and pulled up the communication log. Jasmine reviewed it quickly, finding exactly what she suspected. A message from Reynolds to Rebecca sent 7 minutes before he approached Jasmine's seat. First class packs in 2A. Doesn't fit profile. Check reservation and find reason to reseat. She held up the tablet so Victoria and Richard could see, then addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay in your journey today. My name is Jasmine Washington, and as of this week, I am the new owner and CEO of Legacy Airlines. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Reynolds' face drained of color. Rebecca froze in place, her mouth slightly open in shock. Darius Johnson, the young black flight attendant, couldn't suppress a small smile of amazement. I chose to experience our service as a regular passenger before announcing the acquisition, Jasmine continued. What I experienced today, being questioned, doubted, and ultimately removed from my rightfully purchased seat, is unfortunately not unique. The records show this is part of a pattern at Legacy Airlines, a pattern that ends today. She turned to face Reynolds directly. Captain, the communication logs show you instructed Miss Parker to find a reason to remove me before you ever spoke to me or verified my ticket. You made a judgment based solely on my appearance. Reynolds straightened defensively. This is absurd. I was following security protocols. No, you weren't, Marcus interjected. I verified with TSA and airline security. There were no alerts or flags on Miss Washington's reservation. Thomas Whitfield, sensing the changing tide, attempted to gather his belongings discreetly, as if preparing to exit the aircraft. Please remain seated, Mr. Whitfield, Jasmine said without looking in his direction. Your complaint about me playing the race card is noted, as are your earlier comments about people knowing their place. All of this will be addressed appropriately. Whitfield sank back into his seat, his face reddening. Turning to address the entire cabin once more, Jasmine's voice took on a new quality, not angry or vindictive, but resolute and clear. What happened today is unacceptable, but it's also an opportunity. Legacy Airlines will be transformed beginning right now. Discrimination has no place in aviation or anywhere else. Those who cannot or will not treat all passengers with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, will not have a place in the company moving forward. A silence fell over the cabin as her words sank in. Then, unexpectedly, a passenger in the back of first class began to applaud. Others joined in the sound, spreading until most of the cabin was clapping, a spontaneous recognition of truth being spoken to power. As the applause died down, Darius Johnson stepped forward. Miss Washington, if I may, he said, his voice slightly shaky but determined. I've witnessed similar incidents multiple times, but feared speaking up would cost me my job. Captain Reynolds and Miss Parker have a pattern of reclassifying black passengers' seating assignments, especially in first class. Reynolds started to object, but Richard raised a hand to silence him. Darius, thank you for your courage, Jasmine said. Your insights will be valuable as we rebuild this airline's culture. As of this moment, you're promoted to senior cabin crew, and I'll need your help implementing our new anti-discrimination policies. Darius straightened, a mix of surprise and pride on his face. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Alexandra Chen, still recording from her seat, called out, Miss Washington, I've captured the entire incident on video. It's already receiving significant attention online. People are calling for accountability. Jasmine nodded. Transparency is essential for real change. I welcome the accountability that comes with it. She turned back to Reynolds and Rebecca, who stood frozen in disbelief as their world collapsed around them. Captain Reynolds, Miss Parker, you are both suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Richard will arrange for replacement crew to operate this flight. Reynolds' shock finally gave way to anger. You can't do this. I have 27 years of service with this airline and 17 discrimination complaints in your file that were never properly addressed. Jasmine replied evenly. Your technical skills as a pilot are not in question, Captain. Your judgment and treatment of passengers are. As Reynolds and Rebecca were escorted from the aircraft by airport security, a palpable shift occurred in the cabin, a release of tension, as if everyone could finally breathe freely. Richard approached Jasmine. Replacement crew will be here within 30 minutes. What would you like me to tell them? Tell them this flight marks the beginning of a new legacy, Jasmine replied, one that lives up to its name in the right ways. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had transformed completely. Where tension and discrimination had reigned minutes before, a strange mix of shock, embarrassment, and awakening now permeated the space. With Captain Reynolds and flight attendant Rebecca Parker escorted off the aircraft, the remaining crew members stood at attention, suddenly hyper-aware of their actions and attitudes. Richard Bennett Legacy's VP of Operations moved with newfound urgency, making calls to arrange for a replacement flight crew while simultaneously trying to process how his company had changed in the span of minutes. His carefully planned transition to new ownership had been dramatically accelerated by Reynolds' discriminatory actions. Replacement captain and first officer will be here in 20 minutes, he reported to Jasmine. They're being briefed on the situation. Thank you, Richard, Jasmine replied. She had remained in her seat 2A, making it clear she had no intention of moving again. The other passengers in first class had fallen into an awkward silence, many avoiding eye contact with each other or with Jasmine. Thomas Whitfield, who had been so vocal in his support of Reynolds, stared fixedly out the window, his face flushed with the realization that his own behavior had been witnessed by the airline's new owner. Darius Johnson, the young black flight attendant newly promoted to senior cabin crew, approached Jasmine with a bottle of water and a fresh hot towel. Miss Washington, he said, his voice steadier. Now, is there anything else I can get for you while we wait? I'm fine, thank you, Darius, she replied with a warm smile. But I would appreciate it if you could make an announcement to the passengers explaining the delay and assuring them we'll be underway shortly. Darius nodded, moving to the PA system with a new confidence in his step. As he made the announcement, Jasmine noticed how different his demeanor was. Now standing taller, speaking with authority, no longer constrained by the fear of retribution from discriminatory superiors. Victoria Harris, the airport operations manager, approached Jasmine's seat. Miss Washington, there's quite a commotion brewing outside. News of what happened has spread through the terminal, and several media outlets have reporters on the way. Legacy's PR team is scrambling for a statement. Let them scramble, Jasmine replied. I'll address it directly once we're in the air. The aircraft door opened once more, and a flustered man in an ill-fitting suit burst in. Where is she? Where's Jasmine Washington? Richard moved to intercept him. Martin, now isn't the time. No, it's exactly the time, the man insisted, peering around Richard to locate Jasmine. Miss Washington, I'm Martin Davies, Legacy's Vice President of Communications. We need to get ahead of this situation immediately. The video is going viral, and we're already fielding calls from major networks. Jasmine regarded him calmly. Mr. Davies, the situation will be addressed, but not with the usual corporate doublespeak and non-apologies. This isn't a PR problem to be managed. It's a cultural problem to be solved. Martin looked pained. But the stock price will reflect the company we actually are, not the one we pretend to be. Jasmine finished for him. The truth is already out there, Mr. Davies. Our job now is to show the world what we're going to do about it." As if to emphasize her point, Alexandra Chen's phone chimed loudly. She checked it and looked up with wide eyes. "My video just hit 50,000 shares," she announced, to no one in particular. "And it's been picked up by 2 national news outlets." Martin Davies looked like he might faint. "Miss Washington, please, we need to issue a statement immediately." "And we will," Jasmine assured him, "once we're in the air. For now, please inform the media that Legacy Airlines' new ownership is addressing the situation personally and will make a full statement shortly." Davies reluctantly retreated, already typing frantically on his phone. Victoria leaned closer to Jasmine. "There's something else you should know. We've pulled the flight logs for Captain Reynolds' previous flights. The pattern is even more extensive than we initially thought. Over the past year alone, there have been 37 incidents where passengers with non-white-sounding names were reassigned from first or business class after Reynolds' security concerns." Jasmine nodded, unsurprised, but disturbed by the confirmation. "And the previous management appears to have been aware but unconcerned," Victoria confirmed. "There are internal emails dismissing the pattern as coincidental and not statistically significant." Before Jasmine could respond, Richard returned with more news. "The replacement crew has arrived, but there's another issue. Thomas Whitfield isn't just a passenger. He's apparently a Legacy Airlines frequent flyer with over 2 million miles. He's demanding to speak with someone in authority about his mistreatment today." Jasmine glanced over at Whitfield, who was now speaking angrily into his phone.
"Let him speak with me directly," she decided. "It's time, mister."
Whitfield understood that his status doesn't exempt him from basic human decency. Richard looked uncertain. "Are you sure? He's one of our highest revenue customers?" "All the more reason," Jasmine replied firmly. "The culture changes for everyone, or it doesn't change at all." As Richard went to inform Whitfield, the replacement captain arrived, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Elizabeth Garrett, who approached Jasmine with a professional nod. "Miss Washington, Captain Elizabeth Garrett reporting. I understand there's been a situation. My crew and I are ready to get this flight safely to Chicago." "Thank you, Captain Garrett," Jasmine replied, noting the surprised looks on some passengers' faces at the female captain. "I appreciate your professionalism." "Just doing my job, ma'am," Garrett replied, "which includes ensuring all passengers are treated with respect." She emphasized the last word while glancing around the first-class cabin, making it clear that she understood exactly what had transpired. As Captain Garrett headed to the flight deck to begin pre-flight checks, Thomas Whitfield approached, his face a mask of indignation. "Miss Washington," he began, not bothering to lower his voice, "I've been a loyal Legacy customer for over 15 years, and I've never been treated so disrespectfully. That security officer practically accused me of racism." Jasmine regarded him calmly. "Mr. Whitfield, I believe your exact words were that I was playing the race card, and earlier that some people don't know their place. Would you care to explain what place you believe I should know?" Whitfield faltered, suddenly aware that multiple passengers were watching the exchange. "That's not, I didn't mean you're taking my words out of context. I believe several witnesses plus video recordings captured the context quite clearly," Jasmine replied. "Mr. Whitfield, Legacy Airlines is entering a new era, one where passengers are judged by their behavior, not their appearance. Your business has been valuable to us, but not at the cost of perpetuating discrimination." "Are you threatening to ban me?" Whitfield sputtered, his face reddening further. "Not at all," Jasmine answered. "I'm inviting you to be part of a better airline, one where everyone is treated with dignity. But that requires the same standard of behavior from you that we expect from our staff. If that's not acceptable to you, there are other airlines that might better align with your expectations." Whitfield stood speechless for a moment, unused to being held accountable. Finally, he muttered, "I'll be speaking to my company about our corporate contract with Legacy," before retreating to his seat. I look forward to that conversation, Jasmine called after him pleasantly. As the replacement crew completed their preparations, Alexandra Chen approached Jasmine's seat. Miss Washington, I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for standing up today, but for what you're doing with the airline. It matters. Jasmine smiled genuinely. Thank you for documenting what happened, Miss Chen. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply show the truth. The aircraft door closed for the second time, and Captain Garrett's voice came over the PA system, professional and warm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Garrett. We apologize for the delay and are now preparing for departure to Chicago. Flight time today will be 2 hours and 7 minutes. We appreciate your patience and look forward to providing you with excellent service. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate nearly 2 hours behind schedule, Jasmine took a moment to reflect on everything that had transpired. What had begun as a quiet assessment of her new acquisition had become a very public reckoning, one that would ultimately make Legacy Airlines stronger, more just, and truly worthy of its name. The old Legacy was already dying. The new one was about to take flight. The gentle hum of the engines provided a steady backdrop as Flight 207 finally climbed to cruising altitude. In the first-class cabin, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically from the tense confrontation that had delayed their departure. Now an air of cautious reflection seemed to permeate the space, with passengers processing the extraordinary events they had witnessed. Captain Elizabeth Garrett's voice came over the PA system once they reached 35,000 feet. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. The flight attendants will begin service shortly. We appreciate your understanding regarding today's unusual circumstances. Darius Johnson moved with newfound confidence through the cabin, his recent promotion to senior cabin crew evident in his demeanor. As he prepared the service cart, Legacy Airlines Vice President of Operations Richard Bennett approached Jasmine's seat. Miss Washington, I've received word from the ground. Captain Reynolds and Flight Attendant Parker have been formally suspended pending investigation effective immediately. Security has escorted them from the premises. Jasmine nodded, her expression resolute rather than triumphant, and their response, Richard shifted uncomfortably. Reynolds is threatening legal action for wrongful termination. He's claiming he was just following standard security protocols. The flight deck logs clearly show otherwise, Jasmine replied calmly. But he's welcome to pursue that route if he chooses. The evidence will speak for itself. As Richard returned to his seat, Jasmine opened her laptop and began drafting new anti-discrimination policies that would be implemented across Legacy Airlines. The incident had made it abundantly clear that ad hoc training and vague corporate statements wouldn't suffice. What was needed was a comprehensive overhaul of company culture, backed by clear consequences for violations. Her phone buzzed with a message from her executive team at Skyline Aviation. Stock price fluctuating wildly. Down 3% initially on news of chaos, then up 5% as investors react to leadership change and anti-discrimination stance. Financial press requesting statements. Jasmine wasn't surprised. The markets always reacted nervously to uncertainty, but ultimately, investors recognized that a company plagued by discrimination wasn't just ethically problematic, it was bad business. Meanwhile, in the main cabin, word had spread about what had transpired. Passengers were checking their phones as they connected to the aircraft's Wi-Fi, finding that Alexandra Chen's video had now been viewed over 200,000 times and was trending on multiple platforms. Alexandra herself had been moved to first class at Jasmine's instruction, a gesture of appreciation for her courage in documenting the incident. Now she sat across the aisle, occasionally glancing over with a mixture of awe and respect. Miss Washington, she said, during a quiet moment, your social media mentions are exploding. People are calling you everything from a hero to a corporate plant. Jasmine smiled wryly. I'm neither. I'm just someone who's been on the other side of discrimination too many times and finally has the power to do something about it. In Seat 3C, Thomas Whitfield sat in stony silence, his earlier bravado deflated. Occasionally, he would glance at his phone, grimacing, as he presumably read about the incident online. When Darius offered him a drink, his response was curt, but notably free of the condescension he had displayed earlier. At the rear of first class, a middle-aged black couple who had remained silent throughout the earlier confrontation finally approached Jasmine's seat. Miss Washington, the woman, began hesitantly. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter, and this is my husband, Dr. James Carter. We fly this route monthly for medical conferences, and, well, we've experienced similar treatment, but never knew how to address it effectively. The way you handled it today," James added, "gave us a template for the future. Thank you for that." Jasmine was touched by their words. "Thank you for sharing that. It's exactly why this needed to happen publicly. These incidents thrive in isolation and silence." As the Carters returned to their seats, Jasmine reflected on her mother's words from years ago. "Change the system from within, baby girl. Get to where they can't ignore you, then pull others up with you." Midway through the flight, Richard Bennett approached again, this time with a troubled expression. "We have a situation in Chicago. News crews have gathered at O'Hare awaiting our arrival. And Legacy's board of directors has called an emergency session." "I expected as much," Jasmine replied. "The acquisition agreement gives me controlling interest, but I'll need to address their concerns directly." "There's more," Richard continued. "We've received information that Thomas Whitfield has filed a complaint claiming he was publicly humiliated and reverse discriminated against." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Interesting choice. His company, Whitfield Industries, has a corporate contract with Legacy worth millions annually. He's gambling that we'll overlook his behavior to preserve that relationship." "Will we?" Richard asked hesitantly. "No," Jasmine stated firmly. "We'll review all contracts based on merit and competitive rates, not special exceptions for entitled behavior. If Whitfield Industries wants to continue our partnership, they're welcome to under terms that include adherence to our new conduct policies." Richard nodded, looking simultaneously terrified and impressed. As the flight continued toward Chicago, Jasmine used the remaining time to draft a comprehensive anti-discrimination framework for the airline. Drawing on her years of experience in the industry and the specific patterns revealed in Legacy's internal systems, she outlined policies that addressed everything from hiring practices to passenger interactions. One section specifically focused on ending the practice of subjective seat reassignments that had disproportionately affected passengers of color. Another established an independent review board for discrimination complaints, bypassing the internal system that had previously buried such issues. Darius Johnson approached with a fresh cup of tea.
"Miss Washington, if I may, I have some ideas about improving our training. I've been keeping notes for years about the patterns I've observed."
"I'd like to see those notes," Darius Jasmine said sincerely. "In fact, I'm creating a new position, Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and I'd like you to consider taking on a leadership role in that department." Darius looked stunned. "Me? But I'm just a flight attendant." "You're just nothing," Jasmine corrected him kindly. "You're someone who recognized injustice and documented it even when speaking up could have cost you your job. That's exactly the kind of integrity we need in leadership." As they began their descent into Chicago, Jasmine finalized her immediate action plan. The events of today had accelerated her timeline dramatically, but perhaps that was for the best. Sometimes the most effective changes came not from careful planning, but from bold responses to critical moments. Captain Garrett's voice came over the PA system one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach to Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Local time is 2:47 p.m., and the temperature is 68 degrees. On behalf of Legacy Airlines, I'd like to thank you for your patience today. We'll be parking at Gate E17, where some of you may notice additional personnel waiting. We appreciate your continued understanding as we deplane. The additional personnel was Captain Garrett's diplomatic reference to the media crews that would undoubtedly be waiting. As the aircraft touched down on O'Hare's runway, Jasmine prepared herself for what would come next, the public phase of Legacy's transformation. The plane taxied to the gate, and through the windows the gathered media was visible, cameras and microphones ready to capture the story that was already spreading across the country. For Jasmine, this wasn't just about one incident or even one airline. It was about challenging a system that had for too long allowed discrimination to hide behind protocols, policies, and power. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Jasmine remained seated, allowing other passengers to deplane first. She exchanged contact information with Alexandra Chen and the Carters, thanking them again for their support. Thomas Whitfield brushed past without a word, his expression a mixture of anger and unease. Jasmine noted with interest that he immediately headed toward a waiting corporate representative rather than toward the media. When most passengers had deplaned, Richard approached one last time. "They're waiting. Miss Washington, are you ready?" Jasmine gathered her belongings and stood straightening her suit jacket. "I've been ready my entire life, Richard. Let's go change an airline." With that, she walked confidently toward the aircraft door, prepared to face the cameras, the questions, and the opportunity to transform Legacy Airlines into something truly worthy of its name. A sea of flashing cameras greeted Jasmine as she emerged from the jet bridge into Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3. The news of what had transpired aboard Flight 2207 had spread like wildfire across social media and news outlets, drawing journalists from every major network to the arrival gate. "Miss Washington, is it true you were discriminated against on your own airline? Did you plan this as a test of Legacy's culture? What happens to Captain Reynolds now?" The questions came rapid fire as Jasmine approached the impromptu press area that airport officials had hastily cordoned off. Rather than appearing overwhelmed, she moved with calm purpose, her expression resolute. "Thank you all for your interest in today's events," she began, her voice clear and measured. "What happened on today's flight from Atlanta wasn't planned, but it was unfortunately not surprising either. For too long, discriminatory practices have been normalized in various industries, including aviation. Today marks the beginning of Legacy Airlines' commitment to real, meaningful change." She outlined what had occurred on the flight without sensationalizing the details, emphasizing the systemic nature of the problem rather than villainizing individuals. "Captain Reynolds and Flight Attendant Parker have been suspended pending a full investigation," she continued. "But this isn't about two employees. This is about a culture that enabled their behavior and buried similar incidents for years." A reporter from CNN pushed forward. "Miss Washington, sources say you purchased Legacy Airlines just last week. Was this a setup to make a point?" Jasmine shook her head. "I traveled as a regular passenger to experience the airline's service firsthand as any responsible new owner would. What I encountered was a genuine reflection of Legacy's current culture, one that will be changing immediately." For the next 30 minutes, Jasmine fielded questions with the same poise and directness that had characterized her confrontation with Reynolds. She announced the creation of a new diversity and inclusion department and promised a complete audit of all past discrimination complaints, with appropriate remediation for affected passengers. Legacy Airlines will become an industry leader in creating an equitable travel experience for all, she declared. Not because it's trendy or for positive PR, but because it's fundamentally right and good business. As the press conference concluded, Jasmine noticed a group of Legacy Airlines flight attendants who had gathered to watch, many still in uniform after completing their shifts. Their expressions ranged from hopeful to anxious, a workforce realizing that significant change was coming. She approached them directly. "I know today's events may feel destabilizing," she acknowledged. "Change often does. But I want you to know that Legacy's transformation isn't about punishing employees. It's about building an airline we can all be proud to work for, where excellence in service extends to every passenger regardless of how they look. One flight attendant, an older black woman, stepped forward. Will there be protections for those of us who report discriminatory behavior? In the past, speaking up meant being labeled a troublemaker. Absolutely, Jasmine assured her. Retaliation will not be tolerated under any circumstances. In fact, I'm implementing a new anonymous reporting system effective immediately. The interaction with the flight crew captured by nearby cameras presented a powerful visual. Legacy's new owner engaging directly with frontline employees, listening to their concerns rather than issuing edicts from an isolated executive suite. 6 months later, the transformation of Legacy Airlines was well underway. The company had been rebranded as Horizon Airways, symbolizing a new vision while acknowledging the importance of building on its foundation rather than erasing its past entirely. The changes were far more than cosmetic. Captain Reynolds and Rebecca Parker had indeed been terminated after the investigation confirmed a pattern of discriminatory behavior. Thomas Whitfield's company had initially threatened to cancel their corporate contract, but quietly renewed it after facing their own public relations challenges when their support of Reynolds became public. Darius Johnson, true to Jasmine's word, now headed the new Diversity and Inclusion Department, which had already implemented comprehensive training programs developed in partnership with civil rights organizations. The airline's hiring practices had been overhauled, resulting in the most diverse incoming class of pilots, flight attendants, and ground staff in the company's history. Most significantly, passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment had plummeted by 87%, while overall customer satisfaction scores had risen to their highest levels ever. The initial stock market volatility had given way to steady growth, as investors recognized that ethical business practices and profitability weren't mutually exclusive. On a crisp autumn morning, Jasmine boarded a Horizon Airways flight from Chicago to San Francisco. Unlike 6 months ago, she wasn't traveling incognito. Her face was now recognizable to most of the airline's employees and many passengers. As she settled into her first-class seat, the cabin crew greeted her with genuine warmth rather than the forced deference often shown to executives. The flight attendant serving her section was a young South Asian woman who had been hired during the recent expansion. "Miss Washington, it's an honor to have you on board," she said sincerely. "I joined Horizon because of what you did on that flight. My sister experienced something similar on another airline last year, and no one stood up for her." Jasmine smiled, touched by the young woman's words. "What's your name?" "Priya Sharma," the flight attendant replied. "Well, Priya, I'm honored to fly with you today, and I hope your sister knows she's always welcome here." As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Jasmine looked out the window at the Horizon Airways logo, now emblazoned on the terminal. The journey had been challenging. There had been resistance from old guard executives, threatened lawsuits, and the expected backlash from those who viewed diversity initiatives as political correctness gone too far. But the results spoke for themselves. Horizon was now recognized as a leader in the industry, not just for its inclusive practices, but for the quality of service that naturally flowed from a workforce that felt valued and respected. Captain Elizabeth Garrett's voice came over the PA system. She had been promoted to chief pilot after her exemplary handling of the situation 6 months ago. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Horizon Airways Flight 418 to San Francisco. Our flight time today will be 4 hours and 15 minutes. On behalf of our entire crew, we're committed to making your journey safe, comfortable, and respectful." The last word, respectful, had been added to the standard announcement as a subtle but meaningful reminder of the airline's values. As the plane lifted off the runway and climbed into the clear blue sky, Jasmine thought about how far they had come and the work still ahead. The transformation of one airline wouldn't end discrimination in aviation or society at large. But it was a start, a demonstration that when people with power chose to use it for positive change, systems that had seemed immovable could indeed be transformed. The horizon ahead was wide open, full of both challenges and possibilities, and they were rising to meet it together. This powerful story reminds us that discrimination often thrives in silence and darkness. When people with privilege and power choose to stay quiet, systems of inequality continue unchallenged. Jasmine's journey demonstrates several important lessons. First, documentation matters. Evidence transforms individual complaints into undeniable patterns. Second, true change requires both personal courage and systemic overhaul. Individual actions matter, but lasting transformation comes from changing policies, practices, and culture. Third, accountability must be consistent. Both the overtly discriminatory Captain Reynolds and the complicit bystanders needed to face consequences. Perhaps most importantly, Jasmine shows us that meaningful change doesn't happen by accident. It requires intentional action from those with the power to make decisions. While not everyone has the ability to purchase an airline, we all have spheres of influence where we can challenge discrimination and create more inclusive environments. What would you have done in Jasmine's position? Would you have revealed your identity immediately or gathered evidence like she did? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and regretted not speaking up? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more content that tackles important social issues. Your support helps these stories reach more viewers who might need to hear them. Share with friends who care about creating more just workplaces and communities. Thank you for watching, and remember, real change happens when we have the courage to confront uncomfortable truths.